Chapter 24. The after-dinner cleanup was more awkward than I generally liked. "Wow," I heard Lom say to Steve. "Your friends are intense."
"Yeah," he agreed wearily. "It's pretty much like that all the time with them."
"Must be a mammal thing," Lom speculated. "All the body temperature regulation really gets 'em worked up."
"That's my theory, love."
Rackvid had a nice place, but it wasn't enormous. The Colonel, Vilonic, Steve, Charles, and I had to share a room. Most of us were sleeping on the floor, though I speculated that sleeping was going to be a euphemism for lying awake all night. After we finished cleaning, we thanked our hosts and wandered into our room. I saw Steve crouched over his pack looking for something, and I went over to him. "I shouldn't have said that," I said. He stood up and met my gaze.
"Don't give it another thought, yeah? Believe me, if it were just the two of us, I'd sign up for any crazy, ill-convened, recklessly planned mission if it meant something to you. But not with them."
He gestured towards the others. "I know you would," I said. "I shouldn't have called you a chicken."
"They sound delicious."
"They're okay," I explained. "Better than turkey, not as good as duck."
"We're mates," he said, "which means you can mouth off once in a while, and in the grand scheme of things it doesn't mean much. If I were you, I'd worry less about my feelings, given I'm a pretty rational bloke, and worry more about Temret."
I was more worried about Temret, but I'd figured I'd cross the easy one off my list first. I went over to the room where the girls were staying. The door was open, and I looked in, but nothing good had been going on in there. Misun and Alice were in one part of the room, looking helpless. Temret was on the other side, sitting on her blanket, her back to the others. She must have heard me approach, because she looked at me, but then turned away. Alice got to her feet and came over to me, and we went out into the hall.
"She said if you showed up, we were supposed to let you know she can't speak to you."
"And she sent you to tell me this?"
"I think she's mad enough at you, she's starting to like me,"
Alice said with a sympathetic shrug.
"She's a little hard to figure out sometimes."
"I'm so sick of this." I was struggling to keep my voice down, but the frustration was like a poison in my blood.
"I know, Zeke. And she made me promise to say something else. Please, don't be mad at me. She made me promise before she told me what it was."
I nodded. It was about all I could muster.
"She said you were too late, as usual."
Alice winced as she said the words. Part of me was aware of how hard it must be to be tasked with delivering such stinging words to a friend. Part of me was lost in despair. It was all ruined. We were leaving now, with friends dead, nothing accomplished, Temret going back to live in misery, and Earth in the crosshairs. What had been the point of all of this? There had to be a way to fix it, but I couldn't see it. Then it occurred to me maybe I couldn't see it because it wasn't there. Maybe not everything could be fixed. It was all messed up, and I wasn't in the driver's seat. I was just along for the ride, watching how everything went from bad to worse, powerless to do anything about it. I'd been foolish to think that somehow I could make events unfold the way I wanted them to.
"I'm sorry, Zeke. She's angry and she's frustrated. I know she doesn't mean it."
I just shook my head.
"She wouldn't lash out like that if she didn't care about you,"
Alice said.
"She's hurting too."
I'd been rubbing my face with frustration, but I suddenly stopped. Temret was hurting too. I was standing here feeling sorry for myself, and I realized I was being a selfish jerk. One problem at a time, I told myself. "Thanks, Alice," I said, and I went back to my room. Vilonic was busy settling himself into his sleeping area, working the blankets under him so he could be all tucked in. I kicked him. Not as hard as I would have liked, but Harder than most people generally want to be kicked. Get up, I said.
Here we go,
Steve observed from across the room.
son,
The colonel warned me. He may have said something else, but I wasn't sure because Volonik was groaning from me kicking him again. He was scrambling to get untucked and to his feet. I got another kick in before he was standing. Why are you kicking me, brother? I'm not your brother, you idiot, and I'm issuing a formal challenge or whatever to determine Temret's fate. I hereby challenge you in the name of the deity of moronic fiancés. Volonik looked puzzled. There is no such deity. I don't care, you get my point. Volonik shook his head. Your challenge is unorthodox, and I am not obligated to accept it. Besides, I'd be remiss in my duties if somehow I lost and could no longer protect Tamret. She doesn't want your protection, I told him. She wants to go with me. Of course she doesn't. You are so blind, I said, struggling to keep from shouting. She told me she wants me to take her with me. Volonik gave me a sympathetic smile. Oh, she was just being emotional. Half of the time, I'm sure she has no idea what she wants, but she certainly does not wish to live out her days on an alien world away from her own kind. No, Zeke, I vowed to take care of her, and I shall keep that vow. Please don't kick me again. I watched while he climbed back into his pile of blankets and tucked himself in. That had been my move. My big gesture, getting beaten up by an impossibly strong alien. I hadn't expected to win any challenge. I'd expected to be bloody and bruised in the morning so that Tamret would see that at least I had tried. But Volonik wouldn't even give me that. I was about to start kicking him again, but Steve and Charles had me by the armpits and were dragging me out of the room.
I don't think that's working, mate,
Steve said.
We would all like to kick him, Charles added, but it accomplishes nothing. It's not over, Steve told me. We can keep this from happening. If we all stand against him, there's nothing Volonik can do. We can keep him from taking her.
But we can't keep her from agreeing to be taken, I said. That's the thing that's so messed up. In spite of how her people have treated her, she's going to keep her stupid cast vows and stay with him.
Tomorrow, we shall think of something,
Charles assured me. They both went back to their blankets, and the light went out. I stood in the hallway for a long time, thinking, trying to find another angle, another approach, some way to keep Tamret from agreeing to go back to Raro. At the dinner table, she'd been glaring at me. I realized too late that she wanted me to speak up, to offer her my protection before she reaffirmed her vow or whatever. I'd blown it. That was it. The moment I could have made a difference, and I let it get away. And I wasn't going to get another chance. I don't know how long I stood there. I listened to the others breathing in the darkness, and then to the sounds of snoring. The colonel was particularly loud. Finally, I went over to my own blankets in the hopes that unconsciousness would dull the pain a little bit. I wasn't so lucky. It didn't help that it was so hot, which made it impossible for me to relax. I kept envisioning how things were going to play out tomorrow. We would spend 5 hours riding on an enthusiastic worm. We would reach an abandoned spaceport. And then I would say goodbye to Tamret. This time almost certainly forever. Steve and Charles were good friends to try and convince me that we could turn this around. Maybe they actually believed it, but I knew better. Tamret would not break her vow. She was going to voluntarily walk out of my life. This time I wouldn't have to worry about her being killed or imprisoned or tortured. But I did worry about her being miserable. As I lay sweating on the uncomfortable floor, endlessly mulling this over, I was suddenly struck by an urgent need to pee. Too much information, I suppose, but it surprised me because water consumption wasn't big among the desert folk, and I hadn't had much since arriving, just enough to keep me hydrated. I'd taken care of business before getting ready for bed, but now my body was telling me if I didn't get up and find a toilet right now, I'd have a lot of embarrassing explaining to do in the morning. I padded out of my room and into the hallway. It was dark, but not completely so, and I remembered the way around well enough. For some reason, though, I found myself stopping. I hadn't meant to. 1 minute I'd been creeping along in the dark, the next I was still. In the kitchen off the hallway, I heard Rakvib and Udlom talking. I'm not the eavesdropping sort, but I heard them speak a name that made me freeze in spite of the heat.
Any luck reaching Junip?
Rakvib asked.
No, a sandstorm is interfering with communications,
Udlom said.
We'll just have to follow his standing orders. I'll take him out into the desert tomorrow and dispose of him. They won't suspect anything until it's too late. I'll have Menti bury him. No one will ever find him.
Should we post a guard tonight?
Rakvib asked.
Why bother? If they're worried about us, they'll just slip out and try and find the spaceport, which means they'll wander around until they die of thirst.
I can't believe they actually bought that spaceport story,
Rakvib said.
Junip did say they were simple, Udlom said. But to believe there's a functional spaceport out here after all these centuries? What a bunch of dimwits.
Still, I think it's good fun to trick them into their own demise, is it not?
I love being evil. It's pretty much the best.
I no longer needed to pee. I went back to the room and waited until I heard them go to their respective rooms. Then I waited at least another hour to make sure they were asleep. That's when I got up and shook Steve awake. Shaking didn't accomplish anything, so I poked him in the side, hoping that Ishi were ticklish in the same places as humans. They are, by the way. Also, I can't recommend waking an Ishi up that way. When I picked myself up, rubbing my arm to make sure it wasn't broken, Steve began to sit up.
Sorry about that. Reflex. Why are you waking me up anyhow?
I told him what I'd overheard. Steve was aghast.
But Udlom is cute,
he protested.
And the food was delicious.
Be that as it may, I said, they're working for Junip. There's no spaceport, and they mean to kill us, so I'm thinking it might be a good idea to sneak off now.
The others aren't going to like it, he told me.
Well, they're going to like being dead even less.
Fair point.
We began the process of waking everybody up and explaining the situation.
This is disappointing,
Colonel Rage said.
Better to know than to not,
Charles said.
It looks like the hidden fortress is back on the menu.
But we agreed it was a bad idea,
Volonic said.
I thought we agreed to escape instead.
It's hard to escape on a ship that doesn't exist.
How do we even know this is true?
Volonic said, his ears shooting back, his amber fur growing a little puffy, like he was trying to make himself look bigger.
We only have Zeke's word for it, and he's been attempting to convince us to search for this fortress all along. He could be manipulating us.
If you were one of us,
Charles said,
you would know better than to say that.
Volonic shook his head.
You're right. I'm sorry, brother.
He reached out and patted me on the arm. We are not brothers, I said, shaking him off. Volonic shook his head sadly.
Whether you like it or not, that is exactly what we are.
I didn't want to deal with Volonic's irrational nonsense now. There was too much at stake. I knew Steve could move more stealthily than anyone in our group, so I sent him to wake the girls. Besides, I wanted to keep an eye on Volonic. We hadn't yet discovered how Junip had learned of our plans, and I still suspected Volonic of being a spy. There was no way I was going to let him be alone, even for a minute, until we were out of here. Finally, when the girls were awake and brought up to date, and we'd collected our things, we slipped out into the night to search for the hidden fortress.